I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. Bill, I read a column by Dan Balz in the Washington Post who says, under the headline, "Instability and populist unrest is the new world order," that things have fundamentally changed in this world. And Bill, I'll just give you a quick summary. Angela Merkel, after years of leadership in Germany, is out. Theresa May is fighting for her political life right now after this Brexit debacle. Macron in France is under attack from the yellow vests in the street and people within his own party and in his own country. President Trump under constant threats of impeachment and investigations. Bill, I could go on to other countries, but in what used to be called sort of the Christian world, it looks to me like populist unrest and this social instability have taken over. Am I seeing things wrong, or is there something fundamentally different happening in history right now?
Well, I think there is something fundamentally happening in history right now, and thank God for it, too. I would call this actual progress. I'm not sure if it was Glenn Reynolds. I'm almost positive I saw it in Instapundit, but somebody said that the definition of a country becoming ungovernable is when the people no longer listen to their left-wing elitist overlords, and then it becomes ungovernable. The examples that you've listed are examples of the European Union feeling the results of 30 years of absolute elitist contempt. Now, I seem to remember that Britain voted itself out of the European Union, and I'm pretty sure that happened before the American election. So I want to say, why are they still in the European Union? And the reason they're still in the European Union is because the elitists on the left who have governed Europe through the entire existence of the EU decided that the people made the wrong choice. This is what happened in United States in 2016. Our left-wing moral and intellectual superiors decided that we had made the wrong choice, and since we'd made the wrong choice, we would be made to pay for it, and we would continue to pay for it until we make the right choice, which is the choice to put them into positions of unlimited power and comfort and authority, which is pretty much their entire cup of tea.
Well, Bill, you can say one thing for globalist, elitist power and authority. You don't have as many riots in the streets when they're actually in control, and frankly, you have a more civil discourse in these United States when the populists aren't in the ascendant, don't you?
Yeah, it's kind of quiet on a slave plantation too, Scott. When you've got a really harsh slave master, when it becomes clear to you that any effort to speak up, speak back, or run away is going to result in violent death, it's amazing how peaceful and quiet things can be.
I guess I'd like to wonder, where does it go from here? Because you can see that seems like everything is amping up. It's even in the mild rhetorical way that it's happening in the United States, where the division. You think, how far can this go? We've seen a civil war here. Nobody relishes the thought of that again, and yet
it's inconceivable.
Yes, and so what's the path out of this?
I think if you go and try and get as high above this as you can and step as far back as you can, you hopefully get the clearest picture in some kind of way to answer your question, Scott. So to me, it looks like starting in the 1960s, left-wingers began to infiltrate areas of society that gave them a disproportionate amount of control over that society. In other words, if Saul Alinsky had stood on a street corner in 1959 in New York City, in downtown Manhattan, and said, "Here's why communism is awesome," he wouldn't have gotten very far. So what he did was, and what the rest of them did was that they understood that you're dealing with fundamentally peaceful, fundamentally gentle, fundamentally good people. And the way to get to them and control them is to use their own morality against them. And so, starting in the 1960s in the United States, any number of social engineering projects began, and because they understood that their ideas were so unpopular, they couldn't just take them to the American people. So they had to go into basically two places. They had to go into journalism, and they had to go into, three. Journalism, politics, and education. They would start to have radical students on schools in college campuses. You can chart the beginning of the decline in the United States from the moment that these radicals took over the Yale Law Library in the 60s, and the Yale administration folded oh, sorry, these are great points. This is Tom Hayden's day. If they'd simply called the police and thrown him out of there, you'd still have a fairly intact society.
So to get to the issue,
hang on. So basically, starting from the 1960s, elitists have taken over the media, they've taken over politics, and they've taken over education, and they have used these three very powerful levers to begin to engineer people into their philosophy. Now, the problem with this is that their philosophy requires so much inversion of common sense that in order to enforce it, they have to constantly protect it. They can't let any other outside opinions in, because only takes one kid to say, hey, he's not wearing any clothes, and the whole charade comes down. So what I think we're seeing now, Scott, is we are seeing the collision of left-wing ideology with fundamental, irreducible reality. And that is causing a great deal of friction here. When we're here, and when I say here, I mean in the West. When you tell a German subject that if he is opposed to the idea, as I recall, there was a town in Germany with something like 150 inhabitants, tiny little village, and they put 400 North African refugees in this village of 150 people that's been there for 700 years or something like that. When the president of your country, Angela Merkel, says, if you are opposed to us doing this, then you're not really a German and you should leave. Where does that leave people? Where do they go? This is why the left always produces fascism in Europe, because they are so repressive and so anti-human and so anti-common sense that eventually the people become so sick of them that they go roaring off into the other direction, and that direction in terms of black boots is not a pretty one either.
So in pursuit of this idea of an eventual emergence from this political instability and this populist unrest that Dan Balz at the Washington Post has said has become the new world order, it sounds like you're leading toward one of two inexorable conclusions. One is we just let it keep going until it collapses under its weight. And the second is that we, meaning conservatives, libertarians, constitutionalist-minded people, in the same way as the progressives did, insinuate ourselves into the cultural institutions of education and entertainment and the news media, and use people's own morality against them to win them to the cause of liberty. So which way is this going?
Well, you got that absolutely right. We abandoned the cultural fight because we're not good at the cultural fight. We don't use emotion much. The effusive display of emotion among conservatives is generally considered to be not appropriate. We tend to be governed more by reason and self-discipline and so on, and we're not libertines, and so we expect that people will behave themselves. And our biggest assumption, our biggest failure, Scott, is that because we want to be left alone, we just assume that if we leave them alone, they'll leave us alone, but that's not how they're built. So you're absolutely right. Either things continue along the path that they're going to continue on, or we are finally going to wake up and understand that everything centers around the pop culture. And I think, having had experience with trying to convince conservatives of this over the last 10 years, the chance of that actually happening is probably around 2 or 3%.
Some of it, I wonder whether your rhetoric, that just as you use that, the cultural fight is part of the problem, because it seems to me that the left actually looked at the situation as a lovemaking. They went in to woo. They didn't go in guns blazing. They went in with romance and sex and beauty and dance and music and, cultural institutions that can speak in soft voices about making a contribution to NPR.
Nice try, but I mean, you could make the case that they had a very patient and emotional and long-term view of the changes.
Bill Ayers notwithstanding.
But to say that they offered the whole thing up on a plate of flowers is just plain nonsense. A great example of this is Bonnie and Clyde. It's an exceedingly important movie, and so is Easy Rider. They came right about at the same time. They're very similar in the important respect. Prior to Easy Rider and Bonnie and Clyde, Hollywood was making what we might call conservative movies, and they were making things like Paint Your Wagon and Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and this absolute dreck, just absolute dreck. Along come these left-wing filmmakers, and they start making films like Bonnie and Clyde and Easy Rider, which are modern movies, although if you look at them now, they look like they were made by chimps. Nevertheless, they were here's what they had. They were interesting, they were action films, they were romantic films to the degree that it was a battle against the outsiders, but here's what both of those films had in common. Both Easy Rider and Bonnie and Clyde glorified, romanticized, and absolutely deified criminals, and left this is the part where I'm saying they came at us with love. In these movies, law-abiding people or conservatives are a bunch of either tobacco-chewing, racist rednecks blowing people away with shotguns, or they're petty little police officers who have a personal vendetta against these gorgeous criminals who are doing nothing other than liberating money from the banks to hand out to poor people. Bonnie and Clyde were murderers, and they were thieves, and they stole people's money, and there was nothing noble about them. But if you watch that movie, Bonnie and Clyde, look, you put Warren Beatty in his prime in the lead role of anything, and you're going to be on that guy's side. Okay, so what they accomplished was a sense of having people identify with the anti-hero, having them identify with not the rebel. The rebellion can often be very good. That's why Star Wars had to be destroyed, because Star Wars talked about rebellion in a good way. But the idea of the criminal being the hero and the policeman being the villain was essential to start the inversion of the entire morality of the culture. And people are starting to come to realize, Scott, that you cannot run a society with 197 different bathrooms. You just can't do it. And not only can't you do it, you shouldn't do it, and it's absurd to try to do it. So what left-wingers are complaining about in terms of being ungovernable and the public sure seems to be kind of antsy, I think a good word for us is uppity. I think we're getting a little uppity for them. I really do. And they don't like it. So they're basically saying the world's coming apart when, in point of fact, their world is coming apart. My favorite example of this mindset among the left-leaning elites, and when I say elites, I don't mean they're better people than us. They're worse people than us. They're not very smart. They're not very hardworking. They're really kind of lazy schmucks who basically want to get things by pointing a gun at other people and saying, "Give it to me." But the best example of this was right as Donald Trump was elected, and somebody in the White House press corps said, Donald Trump using Twitter is the end of democracy in America. And my immediate reaction is, no, but it is the end of the White House press corps. And that's all you need to know, I think, about this dynamic.
Well, we are coming up against a hard break at the bottom of the hour, and then Paul Harvey news and
traffic on the nines, right?
That's right. Good day. We thank you for watching this show and also invite you to become part of the producers of this show who are members at BillWhittle.com. You can go to that website. Just go to BillWhittle.com/subscribe and you can join there. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this possible.